The UN Security Council members confirmed that de-escalation is key to the Yemeni conflict. In continuation of the war against Yemenis, Houthi militia prevents delivery of polio vaccines from getting into their areas. The United Nations announces that an agreement has been reached over safer oil tanker. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Rana Swaylam. The United Nations Security Council members confirmed last Tuesday that the only way to end the war in Yemen is by immediate ceasefire. This has been echoed by different council members. The following report looks at major outcomes of that session.
Allowing the war to continue is a choice, and so is ending it. That's what United Nations Special Envoy for Yemen, Hans Gramberg, told the UN Security Council during a meeting on Tuesday in which he shed light on the deteriorating situation in Yemen. With civilian casualties surging and humanitarian aid drying up, Gramberg called for a long-delayed political process to bring an end to the devastating conflict that began in 2014. The Special Envoy's comments come amid an ongoing spike in aerial bombings by the US-supported Saudi-led coalition, which made January a record-shattering month for civilian deaths in Yemen. Civilian casualties in Yemen have nearly doubled since October, when the UN Human Rights Council voted not to renew the mandate of the independent monitoring group investigating potential violations of international law.
The approach that I have when it comes to trying to find a durable and sustainable settlement of the conflict in Yemen is not something that you automatically need to put in comparison with what others have done. I think that what is clear, and if you look at what I am trying to achieve, is to lay the foundations for a sustainable solution of the conflict in Yemen that has not been there for quite a number of years.
During the same briefing on Tuesday, UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator Martin Griffiths warned that the intensification of combat is occurring as aid groups operating in Yemen are rapidly running out of money, forcing them to cut life-saving programs. According to Griffiths, by the end of January, nearly two-thirds of major UN aid programs had already scaled back or closed altogether. The UN humanitarian chief lamented that there is, it seems, no money, looming disruptions to water and sanitation services, again for want of funds, could soon deprive 3.6 million people of safe drinking water, putting them, and especially children under 5, at greater risk of deadly diseases. If these gaps aren't addressed, he continued, it will simply be a death sentence for people whose coping mechanisms in some cases are completely exhausted and who rely on assistance for survival. Gramberg, for his part, said that for each year this war is allowed to continue, the task of ending it becomes more challenging but no less necessary. With trust low on all sides, Gramberg told the Security Council that ending this war would require uncomfortable compromises, which no warring party is currently willing to make. With no military solution to the crisis possible, he said, dialogue and compromise are required if Yemenis are not to be left suffering until the parties are tired of fighting.
The head of the Executive Unit for Displaced Camps discussed the conditions of the displaced with the European Union representatives. The discussion took place in the interim capital of Aden, with some European donors. European delegation further pointed to the role of the government in serving the displaced and providing information about their needs. Shelterbox is a non-profit organization which supports internally displaced people in zones of conflict. They have started helping displaced people in Yemen since the war began in 2014. More details on what this organization does are within this report.
There is a growing conflict and humanitarian emergency in Yemen that has been largely forgotten by the world. Families are living in a silent crisis. More than 4 million people have lost their homes. Families who are seeking refuge have been uprooted, often more than once, by shifting front lines in the civil war that has dominated the country since 2014. Families are living in makeshift shelters made of sticks, palm branches, rags, and anything they can find. Some fear heavy spring rains could trigger a repeat of the flash flooding seen in 2020 and 2021. against the backdrop of coronavirus and the spread of diseases like cholera and malaria, as camps are overcrowded, which means diseases spread quickly. A disaster relief charity called Shelter Box will start distributing emergency shelter in Yemen, along with water filters, mosquito nets, kitchen sets, soap, and wash basins. They will help families protect themselves from diseases. Tents will be provided as shelter for those who are sleeping in the open, helping families who live in makeshift shelters to be more resilient to the weather. Whole communities have been caught in a cycle of displacement, fleeing their homes to a place of safety, only to be made homeless again, as the front line moves or extreme weather sets in. Sea, land, and air blockades made it almost impossible to send aid for many years. In Yemen, 2/3 of the entire population need humanitarian support. Yemen's people live in a silent crisis with a growing conflict and a humanitarian emergency largely forgotten by the whole world. Camps are overcrowded, which means diseases spread quickly, and people have no way to protect themselves. People are fearful of the conflict, fearful of more flooding. Shelter Box or any other organization cannot solve this huge humanitarian crisis, but it can help people build safer spaces for their families and themselves.
The international organization Save the Children has warned that nearly 4.3 million children in Yemen will lose all humanitarian aid next month. The organization added that about 15.4 million people in Yemen lack access to clean water and sanitation, and about 2/3 of the population is in need of help, estimated at $3.9 billion this year. 50 Houthi militants were killed and booby-trapped marches were brought down in Hajj. Houthi elements were preparing for an attack on government forces' positions in Bani Hassan Front in Abs district, north of Hajj. The attack resulted in the killing of 50 Houthi elements with airstrikes by the Arab coalition. Massam destroyed 163 mines and explosive devices planted by the Houthis in the districts of Bayhan and Harib. The destruction happened after mines were dismantled and removed by the engineering teams of the Giants Brigades and Massam's teams. The engineering teams are continuing their efforts to clear and survey all the destroyed areas. The government forces defeated the Houthi militia in new locations south of Marib. A military source reported that the government forces were able to defeat the Houthi militia in several locations in Al-Bur and Al-Faliha. It added that coalition air raids targeted militia sites on the same front, inflicting human and material losses. The Houthi militia doubled the recruitment of children, which escalated crimes against Yemenis over the 8 years of the war. The recruitment coincides with local and international human rights calls to classify the Houthi militia as a terrorist organization. The United Nations further included the Houthis on the blacklist of groups violating children's rights and took more serious punitive measures against Houthi leaders responsible for crimes against children in Yemen. 5 Houthi militia fighters were killed near the lines of contact with the joint forces in Taiz Governorate, west of Yemen. The military media of the joint forces reported that the inspection units had spotted a Houthi combat vehicle, confirming the destruction of the vehicle and the killing of 5 Houthi militia fighters on board. Houthi militia continues its war against Yemenis in all levels. In an unexpected move, they prevented the delivery of polio vaccine from getting into their areas. This would put millions of children's lives under risk. More on this story is within the following report.
The Yemeni government has held the Houthi militia fully responsible for the re-emergence of polio in the areas under its control, as it prevented the immunization teams from carrying out their tasks after Yemen got rid of childhood communicable diseases in 2006. Polio reappears in Yemen as a natural result of the militia's obstruction of immunization campaigns. The militia has continuously destroyed the medical sector, refused to cooperate with medical staff, and prevented vaccine entry into its areas of control. It is not the first time that the Houthi militia has refused to implement vaccination campaigns against epidemics and diseases threatening the lives of millions of Yemenis. The Iranian-backed Houthi militia threatens the mortality of civilians in various ways, not only through the war it has waged against the Yemeni people for more than 7 years, but also through depriving them of the most basic human rights, such as vaccination against a life-threatening epidemic. The Yemeni government called on the United Nations and its affiliates to disclose the practices of the Houthi militia and its continued rejection of vaccination campaigns in the country, especially those dedicated to combating polio. Observers believe that the militia's prevention of vaccination campaigns threatens the efforts made to protect Yemeni children from the spread of polio and constitutes a serious challenge for a country burdened with the aftermath of a ceaseless war and the health system's collapse. The international community must assume its responsibility to stop this looming threat that endangers the lives of Yemeni children.
An official source reveals exploitation practices by the Houthi militia in the port of Hodeidah. According to the source, the head of the Revolutionary Committee directly supervises the storage of smuggled weapons and the installation of missiles and drones in the ports. The source confirmed that the head of the committee was involved in looting the port's resources, which are estimated at 14 billion Yemeni riyals per month. The port of Mecca resumes the export of the first shipment of local agricultural products to African markets. Director of Mecca Port considered the export as the start of the development wheel in the port. He further added that this export gives people in the port hope to resume the import and export process, and it will witness some recovery this year. The United Nations announced that a deal has been reached to offload the floating storage ship Safer, stranded off the coast of Yemen. Martin Griffiths said recent progress in efforts to resolve the tanker issue by shifting the oil to another ship. More on this story is within the following report.
The UN has coordinated a deal in Yemen to unload more than 1 million barrels of crude oil from the resting FSO Safer tanker and make safe what officials and experts have described as a ticking environmental time bomb. The FSO Safer, an offshore floating storage vessel used to export crude oil, has been in place since the 1980s and is at dire risk of breaking apart and unleashing its cargo of oil across the Red Sea. UN Humanitarian Chief Martin Griffiths told the UN Security Council about a deal to transfer the oil from the FSO Safer.
On a separate note, I'm pleased to report recent progress in efforts to resolve the Safer tanker issue, including an agreement in principle to a UN-coordinated proposal to shift the oil to another ship.
The tanker is a Japanese-made vessel built in the 1970s and sold to the Yemeni government in the 1980s to store up to 3 million barrels of crude pumped from oil fields in Ma'rib, a province in eastern Yemen that is currently a battlefield. The ship is 360 meters long and has 34 storage tanks. Since the start of the Yemen war in 2015, experts have been unable to reach the ship to assess the risk, and skeleton crew remains abroad under armed guard by the Houthi rebels to keep the ship together. Experts and officials have called the FSO Safer a floating bomb. Greenpeace last month said that it could cause one of the biggest oil spills disaster in history that would cause widespread severe environmental damage. It also added that the entire sea region's drinking water supply could be contaminated by oil in just 3 weeks following a spill. Internal documents obtained by the Associated Press in June 2020 showed seawater had entered the engine compartment of the tanker, causing damage to the pipes and increasing the risk of sinking. According to the report, experts said maintenance was no longer possible because the damage to the ship was irreversible. A leak from the crumbling tanker was reported by a top Yemeni official in December. For months, the UN has attempted to send a team to assess the risk amid international calls for action, but efforts to unload the oil and make the rusting hulk safe have been hampered by the Houthis. Negotiations between the UN and the rebels in control of the area where the ship is failed earlier last year.
Coming next. Medical charity camps are great help to sick people, especially during war.
هذا هو محل استهداف الحواث الذين استهدفوا المواطنين وهم نائمين. هذا هو الصاروخ. من الساعة 4 ما سمعنا الضربة من الحوثيين في المخيم. هذا يعني استشهدوا أولاد عمي، هذا استشهدوا أنا أخواني كلهم، يعني شوف يعني الدم في الخيم. الدم في الخيم يعني في كل مكان، يعني رؤوسهم ما التقوش، الرأس ما التقاش، الرأس ما التقاش. الحمد لله بالحمد.
In order to alleviate the suffering of cardiovascular patients, especially those who cannot afford paying for medication, a charity medical camp was started in Aden. Hundreds of sick people have benefited from this project. The following report sheds light on this noble social initiative.
Haj Saeed Ahmed has finally sought out treatment for his heart condition. His circumstances forced him to remain patient in the face of excruciating agony. He was recently transported in his wheelchair to this free medical camp by one of his relatives, where he joined other patients with heart problems.
He has a heart condition. He had 2 heart attacks, and the doctor has said a month ago that he would have to be catheterized. This camp is a blessing, and we are thankful to those who found it.
The free camp, located in Aden and built with the support of a number of stakeholders and charitable doctors, is the first of its kind to offer diagnostic and therapeutic cardiac catheterization and free stent placement. The camp's goal is to assist people who are unable to afford expensive therapy.
The project was developed and supported by Major General Qasim Abdulaziz Zubaydi and financed by Naqib Charitable Foundation. We have received more than 150 cases of catheterization and 50 stent placements. We've placed strict regulations on potential patients to target poorer demographics and people with medical reports citing they needed our offered operations. We are pleasantly surprised by the number of patients we've received.
The first phase targeted approximately 200 sick cases from destitute groups who could not afford the costs of catheterization and treatment. But camp organizers were surprised by the increase in the number of patients attending. They received nearly 500 cases from Aden and neighboring governorates.
The aim of our camp is to alleviate the suffering of sick people. We've targeted 200 cases that needed catheterization, and we've received over 500 applications. We've begun procedures to transition into the second phase.
These patients are threatened with abrupt death at any time. They've endured misery that has weighed down on their spirits and exhausted their souls, all because they cannot afford the cost of therapy.
The tools required to diagnose coronary arteries are very expensive. The cost of cardiac diagnostic catheterization is from $300 to $400, and the cost of stents are from $2,500 to $4,000. Some patients require more than one stent in session. This camp was founded by philanthropic parties who receive no financial rewards for their efforts. The cost of treatment here is 100% free.
The essential workers in this camp are committed to lifting the suffering of the patients in their care, their efforts to free these patients of ailment unyielding.
The commission of remittances from Aden to Sana'a continues to rise, affected by fluctuations in exchange rates. Banking sources said that transfer commissions from Aden to Sana'a have risen to more than 96,000 riyals for every 100,000 riyals. This coincides with the return of a major collapse of the Yemeni riyal exchange rates, accounting for 1,100 riyals for every $1. The Supreme Council of Energy approved a set of necessary measures to meet the needs of Aden and the liberated areas. The Prime Minister directed the development of a chronic implementation plan to complete the achievement of the required reforms in the electricity sector, especially those required in the Saudi oil derivatives grant. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. The UN Security Council members confirm that de-escalation is key to the Yemeni conflict. In continuation of their war against Yemenis, Houthi militia prevents delivery of polio vaccines from getting into their areas. The United Nations announces that an agreement has been reached over safer oil tanker. This is the end of the news. For more, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Yemen Today English. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.